welcome to Up Close with Carlos Sang, celebrating art, entertainment, and the human spirit. Welcome to another episode of Up Close with Carlos Sang. My next guest is currently working at the Sheffield Crucible on a brand new production of The Crucible by Arthur Miller. She is an Olivier Award nominated actress, and it's a huge delight to be able to introduce the wonderful Anoushka Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I feel like The Crucible, it's such a well-loved play. It's probably one of the most well-known plays as well in the English language, and it's one of the most performed plays around the world. What do you think it is about this show which has continued to resonate with audiences down the years?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, firstly, I just think the writing is next level, and the thing about stories, in as far as they're central to the human experiences, is that if you come up with a good story, it never really runs out, because it's normally about what's true about human beings and what's true about society. And The Crucible is very much an accurate representation of sort of the pettiness of social groups, and the complexity of belonging to a group of people and not belonging. But it's also about who holds power in a community, and what that power looks like, what sex does to that power. And it's also about what's right and wrong. And personally, I think we're never going to fully agree what is right and what is wrong. So it will always be interesting to watch plays about people working out what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the show, of course, it's incredible as well, and, really, pure drama. And it's really quite incredible as well, the fact that this is based on real life events, that this actually happened.
It's mad.
Yeah, did you know much about the Salem witch trials too yourself?
No, I mean, I think you can't not hear about the Salem witch trials, but I can't say that I'd given them like a lot of thought. Although I think as a woman I've read a lot of sort of feminist literature, and I'm very interested in power in women, it's very easy. I mean, I sort of knew about witch trials in general and the persecution of women who are other or seem to contain more power than other women, and, men have loved hanging women for being witches since the dawn of time. But I didn't know about the specificity of the Salem witch trials, and it's a very different set of circumstances, and especially the way that Arthur Miller wrote it. Abigail Williams's mad manipulation of this belief in witchcraft. No, I didn't know very much about it at all, and now I'm horrified and fascinated by it. And it also seems, we always look at things that have happened in the past and say, how could that happen? That's so crazy. But actually, I think it's quite easy to believe that a young, charismatic teenage girl could whip a whole bunch of people into a frenzy.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, would you say there are any, particular parallels as well, between the events of the play and, events happening today too?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the play was written because Arthur Miller couldn't write honestly about the McCarthy trials, and he was being persecuted in the United States for potentially being a communist, and there were these sort of witch trials going on, and so the Salem witch trials in the play are already a metaphor for the McCarthy trials. So do they work then as another metaphor for today? Yeah, I think they do. I think already the sort of question of groupthink and of belonging to the right side and saying all the right things at the right time is definitely something that we all feel like we have to do now with social media. I can't think of an exact example right now where we're persecuting people like a witch trial, but I think it's incredibly relevant, and I think it's how we operate as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Elizabeth Proctor, your character who you play, she was, treated awfully by the Salem community back in the day. But I feel like, in Arthur Miller's play, she is more than just a victim. She's more complex than that. What was it about, this character that, drew you in as an actress?
Oh, there's so many things. I have to say that one of the main reasons I wanted to do it is I went into audition for Anthony Lau, and I just think he is a delight and a genius. And by the end of our 1 hour conversation, I was like, oh, I want to work with this person. I also, she's a grown up, which is quite interesting in that I think she probably is the character that holds the most integrity and maturity in the show. And I've spent the last few years playing young women who are sort of looking to get married off. And I was joking to all my friends that I'd finally made it to wife status, and I was playing a woman who's already married at the beginning of the play, but not happily married. So that was just a challenge as an actor, you know, and as you grow, you get access to parts that I wouldn't have been able to play this woman 5 years ago. So that's just exciting. But also, yeah, I mean, Arthur Miller was in love with Marilyn Monroe, but married to another woman, and he'd been with her for 12 years. And it's interesting that he wrote this play about a man who's cheated on his wife and is now feeling incredibly penitent, and that I get to play Elizabeth Proctor. And I was talking to Anthony the other day, and I said, do you think he sort of wrote it as penitence towards his wife? Because in the play, the wife is the sort of morally superior saint. And I think you know, in reality, he left her and married Marilyn Monroe. So I find that really interesting. And Elizabeth, she's just a gift of a part. But I also think I think what we've tried to find is her gnarliness and her knottiness, because she can be played as a martyr. She can be played as this like saintly woman that's been unjustly cheated on and is yet standing by her man and sees the truth of everything. But that's quite boring, because I don't think anyone is that good. And so I think what we've done in this production is to try and make her as human as possible and say she is actually quite a flawed person and quite a vindictive person, and she's furious at her husband for what he's done, but she loves him, you know. And ultimately, when you love someone, you put up with all their nonsense, and that's part of the deal that she signed up to. And I think we're trying to find as modern an interpretation of her as is possible, given that she's very specific to her time. Because also in 1692, you're not going to divorce your husband. Like, that's not an option. But I want to make it a choice, you know. So I'm obsessed with her. She's such a joy to play.
Yeah, I think love is so complex, you know, how it, you know, affects human behavior. You mentioned Anthony Lau, you know, who's such an exciting up and coming director. What were those, you know, initial conversations like, you know, with Anthony on, you know, how to, you know, make this piece, you know, feel relevant and, you know, contemporary, you know, for an audience today?
I think Anthony always had, I can't speak for him, but I think that we certainly spoke about rehabilitating Elizabeth and rehabilitating Abigail, and saying that even though this is a play about witch trials that circle largely around women accusing and women being accused, it is really a play where a lot of men stand around and talk about a lot of women, and how can we make those women more real. And if we've done our job correctly, I remember him saying people should feel sorry for Abigail and people should feel deep sympathy for Elizabeth, which I think is also maybe what's written. But also I think when you go into audition as an actor, you basically learn from the audition 50% of what the director's like. And my favourite kind of auditions are ones where you sort of do the scene and then you have a half an hour chat. And with Anthony, it was an hour chat. And we talked about feminism, we talked about marriage, we talked about commitment, we talked about infidelity. And through that conversation, it becomes really apparent that he's the sort of director who's interested in the actor's take and is going to allow the actor to take full ownership of their characters. And it's just very exciting. And he and Georgia Lowe, the designer, had a lot of clear sort of ideas, and they set parameters for us about how we were going to play. But then the rehearsal room was so free and not prescriptive. It was really, really great. I had a great time.
Yeah, were there any traits in Elizabeth Proctor too that you were able to identify within yourself that you could relate to too?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a human, so I know what it is to love someone and be disappointed by them at the same time. And that's very accessible. And also, it's funny, when we did the first read through, a couple of the people in the company said, oh, she's quite naggy. And then we had a sort of argument about what nagging is and whether it's a misogynistic term. I've definitely been accused of being a bit naggy before.
And I'm interested in her access to power. You know, she's very different when she's on her own with John to what she's like in public. And in public, she's a very submissive, secondary person. And in private, she's definitely ruling that household. And I relate to that sort of code switching of, you know, I think she's a very real woman who knows when she's allowed to hold power, and when she's not allowed to hold power, she behaves in a different way. And I think that's really interesting. But I actually think she's a much better person than me.
And like for real, and that's quite fun. And I think that she has a clarity that I don't have. I never really know
What I think, what's real, and she definitely knows what she thinks and what's real. And so there's something really nice about playing someone who's so sure of themselves, because I'm not a very sure of myself personally. I mean, publicly, I'm more of a John Proctor, really. Like publicly, I know what I think and I know what is right, but privately, I'm, sort of a charming hot mess.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking of John Proctor as well, how has it been, working with Simon on, developing that relationship and that dynamic between Elizabeth and John too for the show?
Oh, it's been fascinating and really like challenging and delightful. Simon is a extraordinary, thorough, rigorous actor, and we have actually very different approaches, um, which we sort of had to learn each other. But we wanted the same thing from the beginning. You know, we wanted this couple to feel like a real married couple that and we wanted to fully render that and to live in it as authentically as possible. And then we got up on our feet, and Simon's amazing. He's very, very brave in the rehearsal room, and I am less brave. I think I take a couple of weeks to start messing around. And so we had to but that sort of worked for John and Elizabeth, because I think they're quite different. And then now we're in shows, it's really, but it's not just Simon. The entire company is so skilled and talented and kind. And Anthony's made this sort of really fun playground for us where we are doing the Crucible, but we also feel like we're doing something new every night. And we all stay on stage for long periods of time. So I get to watch everybody else. And I love watching Simon. And I love watching Rose Chalou, who plays Abigail. And I love watching literally everybody in the cast. I'm obsessed with Sargon Yelder, who plays Reverend Paris. And it's just so delightful. And everybody somehow manages to make the text fresh and new. So it sounds, like thoughts that Rose and Sargon have had. It's really cool. It's great. I'm sorry, yeah, I'm having a really lovely time.
Yeah, I mean, Sheffield Crucible, itself is also, a gorgeous, gorgeous theatre. It's such a vast space. How has that, that vastness as well, being able to, lend itself to, this piece too?
I think that's Anthony and Georgia, the designer, have both obviously worked here a great deal, and it's so nice when you work in a challenging space with a team that know that space. It was definitely a shock when we moved from the rehearsal room onto the stage, and we were like, oh right, okay, this is actually, really basic things like, we have to look up a lot more on the stage, and you want to reach the people in the back seats, and you're like, oh, they are quite far away. And it's in deep thrust, which, but then in the rehearsal room, it was quite tricky. I find that quite tricky to understand. I'm not very visual and spatial. So if someone describes a space to me, I don't really understand what they're saying. So I always play to the space that I'm in. But then when we got into the theatre, I was like, well, this is quite easy, because obviously I want these people on the side to see me as well. So I'll just
open up. It's very natural progression. And it's the funny thing about it is when you sit in the auditorium, it feels like a very big space, but on the stage, it feels very small and very intimate, and everybody feels very close to you. So it's not it's not a hard space. It's actually a very generous space, because the actors get to feel safe, but we also have quite a wide reach. Yeah, and the design of it is they've left the space quite open and quite sparse. There's not a set, we're not setting it in 1692. We're not in little wooden huts. There's basically Act 1 only has a table on stage, and Act 2 only has a bunch of flowers on stage, and it's a lot of room to play in.
Yeah, I feel like it's also been, a while since we saw you do, regional theatre, outside of London. How has it
Yeah.
been? Yeah, yeah, how has it been, working in Sheffield? And, do you feel like there are any differences, between London audiences and, Sheffield audiences?
Yeah, well, this is my first time doing regional theatre. I did Edinburgh before, and that's not the same. But it sort of whet my appetite to do more of it because it feels so exciting to perform to a whole new bunch of people. Um, the audiences in Sheffield are more polite than the audiences in London. That would be my main takeaway. Like, there's less phones going off, less noise. Yeah, I don't know, they are very attentive. I don't know if that's just our production, but it made me realise how I played to quite a lot of houses in London where people are pretty badly behaved and quite drunk. They're also quite white, which I find interesting, and I don't know what that is about. I mean, the audiences in London are very white, but the audiences in Sheffield are very white, and I find that interesting because we've got a very diverse cast, and we've like worked out. I mean, Anthony has cast it quite specifically with Jacob Sparrow, the casting director, and we've got a black John Proctor, and so it is. That's quite interesting. I hope that's okay to say. But they're really lovely. I really love, and also Sheffield Crucible. If you go in for like lunch on a Wednesday afternoon, it feels like a community hub. Like there's so many people in there having the very delicious homemade vegetable soup and the sausage rolls, and it does feel like a sort of cultural centre in a way that in London I think we're so spoilt for theatres. We don't hang out in them really, unless you're writing a play. But actually it does feel like people come and have tea at the Sheffield Crucible, which is really nice. It's a lovely theatre, and all the people who work there are also, it's a nice, like, it feels like a community.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Actually, that's not something that I previously noticed. Has there been a particular place in Sheffield that you particularly like to hang out or visit in, when you're not working too?
That's a nice question.
Well, my digs flat is really nice. I'm just looking out the window and I live in a basement flat in front of a beautiful garden. Uh, there's lots, well, as a company, we've been driving out on the weekend and going for walks in the Peak District because it's like 25 minutes away and it is amazing. I'm a born and bred Londoner, but you'd have to travel quite far in London to find such beautiful, untouched nature. And here you can pop in a car or get on a train, and in 20 minutes, you're in a beautiful valley with like a reservoir at the bottom. And that's been really beautiful. Um,
Otherwise, I've spent about 90% of my wages in Marmaduke's, which is the coffee shop next to the Crucible. If you want a good coffee in Sheffield, they are incredible. But no, I'm quite a homebody, so if I'm not at work or playing the piano, which I often sneak in to do at the theatre, I'm normally at home.
Something that I didn't know about you was that you graduated from Oxford with a degree in Russian and Italian. I was curious, when you were doing that degree, did you have a vision for yourself to be an actress, writer, or did that sort of come later for you?
oh, it came much later. I didn't have any idea. Going back to Elizabeth Proctor being very sure of herself. Like, I wrote songs. I started writing songs when I was 14 and I had a band. And when I was at Oxford, I did lots of singer-songwriter stuff. And I found my degree really, the only thing I knew with clarity by the end of my degree was that I didn't want a real job. And I was like, I'm not, I went to all the careers fairs and I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to make art and I want to make music. And I was really sure I wanted to make music, but everything. But then I was making music and I had a band and I was trying to get a record deal and I had like residencies at the Troubadour or upstairs at Ronnie Scott's. And then I met a playwright totally randomly and when I was 23, 24, and he was like, hey, you should write music for plays. And so I started doing that. And then I got into rehearsals and I was like, oh, this is fun. I like these people. And then someone put me in the band of a show. And then I wrote the music for a show and a casting director was like, do you want to be in the play? And I was like, oh no, I don't know how to act. And then he was like, oh, I think you do. And then I was about 20, was 20, my first professional acting job was 2016. So I was 28 and I and I played Mary in Jesus Christ Superstar. And then I was like, oh no, I really like this. But it was, yeah, it was very unplanned. I just sort of went towards, I made music all the time, and I met lots and lots of people who were into the things that I liked through making music. And then I just followed them until I met other people. And I was very, very lucky to meet a lot of people who were interested in me and suggested things to me. And now here I am, a full-time actor.
Yeah, I mean, since you first started acting as well, you've done such a wide range of work, from Jesus Christ Superstar to Henry V to now the Crucible. Did you have a sort of idea of what sort of work you wanted to pursue, as an actress too?
That sort of came later. At the beginning, I really had no idea what I was doing. And then I got to a point around my 30th birthday, I was like, this is sort of going quite well, and I should have a think about what I want to do. Because at that point, I had just been following what people had suggested. And I just am quite hungry intellectually, and I want to be stimulated by the work that I do. So I want it to be quite hard, and I want it to be interesting. And I want to work with great people, really. If I'm really honest, I'm like 95% motivated by the people that I work with always. Like I wanted to work with Anthony, and so he was doing the Crucible, so I wanted to do the Crucible. But I think there is a problem in our country. There's a snobbery around musical theatre. And if you do too much musical theatre, it becomes very difficult to be seen for straight theatre. So I think the only real clarity I've had for quite a long time is to be careful about not just doing musicals for too long. And so to sort of balance that as much as possible. But also I'm still very much a jobbing actor. So I see what people ask me to come in for. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, of course. But also coming back to your writing as well, Elephant, at the Bush Theatre, was a pretty, groundbreaking piece too. It was such a thrilling experience. Did the show end up, being what you had imagined it to be, when you first writing it, or did it, evolve quite a bit by the time it reached the stage?
I just keep repeating this terrible thing, which is no, it didn't at all end up what I meant it to be. I had no idea what I was doing. No, I'm really, look, I guess the thing at the basis of everything is I am very instinctive as an artist, which is funny because I'm not at all instinctive as a human. And so I follow, I start making things and I start doing things without knowing what I'm doing. And I just so Elephant, I just started writing and I didn't really know what I was writing. And then I sort of hit a wall when I got to the point where I had to think about it and make a structure for it. And it took 2 years but then I wrote all the family stuff and then I was like, cool, that's done. And then I started researching the elephant ivory history and I was like, oh, okay, that's done. And then I brought my friend on as a dramaturg and she was like, I think you need a plot. I was like, oh yeah, okay. But it really evolved. And again, I was really supported by the Bush. Lynette and Daniel Bailey and Deirdre O'Halloran were amazing. And Jess Edwards, my director and dramaturg. And I would bring them things and be like, do you think this is something? And they'd say yes. And why don't you write a bit of this? But I really just, I guess I'm always trying to find what feels good. And so when you're writing or acting or making music, you're just sort of fumbling around in the dark and then suddenly something feels really good and then you're like, oh, that must be good. And that's very much how I wrote Elephant, although I have to say that I did know ultimately that I wanted to write about the experience of being middle class and a person of color and the erasure of any ethnicity that isn't white the higher up the class ladder you get and how difficult it is to hold both of those identities at the same time and how I think that is a legacy of colonialism.
Mm.
That was really clear, but I didn't know how to make it a play.
Okay. Did you always know that you were going to play Lila as well in the show, or was there a point where you thought that you only wanted the writing credit too?
Um, I can't actually remember. I think it became clear quite because it started out very autobiographical. And actually what happened was we had to move it away from being so violently autobiographical. So I think it was it sort of wasn't a decision. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and at a certain point, it became obvious that I was going to perform it. Um, and but what's funny is that now I want to write for someone else, and because I think when you write for yourself, you obviously know all your own strengths, and so you write to them. And I am interested in writing for other people and discovering if I can make that stand up as well. And that's what I'm sort of heading towards now.
Do you reckon Elephant will come back anytime soon as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. We didn't expect it to come back the first time. So it was in the studio and then it came back into the main space last year. And then there was some interest, I'm being really transparent, in like potentially trying to bring it into the town. And then it sort of died down. Um, and then there are a few options for it to maybe go on, but it's I'm really proud of it. In all honesty, it's quite a draining piece to perform, in as far as it's about my experiences of racism, but also it's 1 hour 15 of just me alone on stage. And the circumstances would have to be right for it to be done again. And I guess I'm just waiting to see what comes in. But the other thing is, I think if it ends now, maybe it'll come back in 5 years with someone else doing it, and that'd be quite exciting. So yeah, never say never. As yet, unclear.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, just also, coming quickly back to the Russian and Italian as well. Is that something you potentially might want to explore with again, going forwards, as an actress or as a writer?
Well, listen, my main problem at the moment is that my sister is getting married this summer and she's marrying an Italian man. And she's asked me to perform the wedding ceremony in Italian. So that is made me want to brush up on my Italian in a way that nothing has for quite a long time. So that's it coming back into my life. I mean, I'd love to do a Chekhov at some point, and Chekhov was the reason that I did Russian at university. And um, and I feel really grateful that I have access to, because also I'm bilingual French English, my mum's French, and I feel really grateful that I grew up with access to lots of different cultures, different books, different plays, different music. And I'm definitely interested in, there's a new Natalia Ginsburg collection that's just come out, who's a great Italian writer that I did at university. And I picked up the book in Waterstones yesterday, and then I read the first page, and then I was like, well, I could read this in Italian, so I'm going to order it in Italian. And that's fun, but I don't know that it like ties in with my creative practice. Who knows though? Because in Henry V, I ended up speaking French because Max Webb still wanted a French speaking Princess of France. So maybe someone will want me to speak Russian or Italian on stage at some point. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see, definitely. Yeah, going forwards, are there still any parts that you would still like to play going forwards too?
Yeah, there are. I'm really excited actually to, this is an unusual thing for an actress to feel, I think. I'm really excited to get older because I think I've spent, as I said, like quite a few years playing the sort of ingenue character, and there are fewer parts for older women, but I'm going to swear, they are fucking great. And I'm really, I used to always say that I wanted to play Hedda Gabler or Norma in A Doll's House, and I would love to play Hedda Gabler, but I actually would love to play a woman written by a woman. And I think there's some really interesting female playwrights and screenwriters out and about right now writing new original parts for complicated, real, beautiful, vulnerable women. And I I hope that one of them comes my way at some point in the next 10 years, and that I get an opportunity to, like I'd love to be in a show written by Lucy Prebble, or there's currently, who's directing, oh, my brain's just gone all funny. That'll come back to me and I'll remember it 10 hours after we finish this podcast. There's just some really exciting people working right now. And I hope that they make me some meaty parts that I want to play.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And Adult House is coming to Sheffield Crucible later this year as well. So you never know. Yeah, just as a last question, what would you say is the best part about being Anoushka Lucas?
Oh, that's such a sweet question, especially because I had therapy this morning. Um, oh, I'm going to answer. There are two best parts to being an Ishkalukas. The first is I have such a wonderful community of friends and family, and I am so blessed to be so loved by such great people. Um, the second is that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I started playing the piano when I was 7, and I started writing songs when I was 14. And the only thing I knew was that making music and telling stories was the thing that made me happiest on earth. And now I'm in my mid 30s and I make my entire income from making stories. And I've been given all these extraordinary opportunities, and I'm doing all right as an actor on stage. And I'm writing, and people have paid me to write things. And I'm going to go and record my second album in May, which I'm really excited about. And I remember I spent my whole 20s wanting permission to be an artist. And now I feel like really comfortable when I meet people and they say, "What do you do?" I say, "Oh, I'm like an actor and a writer and a musician." And I'm not lying, and I don't feel any imposter syndrome. And that's amazing. Like, I feel so lucky.
Anoushka Lucas, thank you so much for joining us today. That's so wonderful.
You're so welcome. It was really lovely to speak to you. And I hope, I can't, my mum will listen to it and she'll love it, but I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.